Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz, and rightfully so, asbestos. We all know it's bad news, but how worried should we really be? We've got a mountain of sources you guys have sent in on asbestos, so we're going to break it all down. The history, the real risks, and most importantly, how to navigate this silent threat lurking in our homes and buildings.
And that's the key, right?
Yeah.
Shifting from, oh my God, asbestos to, okay, what do I actually need to know to stay safe? What's wild is how common this stuff used to be. Like, it was a miracle material. And you know what? For a while, it kind of was.
Yeah, the sources really paint a picture of just how ubiquitous asbestos was, especially in Denmark. Eternit roofs, insulation, fireproofing, you name it, asbestos was the go-to. So what made it such a hit back in the day?
It's all about those amazing properties. Fire-resistant, incredible insulator, crazy durable. Back when those were the big priorities, asbestos seemed like a dream come true. I mean, they weren't thinking about long-term health effects the way we do now.
And then the truth about this miracle material started to unravel. Turns out it's those tiny, practically invisible fibers that are the real danger.
Absolutely. And some of the sources really drive home how small we're talking, far thinner than the tiniest branches in your lungs. So when you breathe them in, they can get lodged deep down in your lung tissue.
And that's where the trouble really starts. Our bodies just weren't designed to deal with that kind of invasion. It's like trying to digest fiberglass.
Exactly. Your immune system tries to fight back, obviously. It sends out these cells, called macrophages, to try to engulf the fibers and neutralize them. But asbestos is so durable, those macrophages can't break them down.
Yeah.
And it's this constant battle that leads to inflammation, scarring, and ultimately a whole host of serious health issues.
And to make matters worse, there's this long latency period between exposure and actually showing symptoms, right?
Right, we're talking 10, 20, even up to 50 years. Someone could be exposed in their youth and not feel the full effects until much later in life. And we're not just talking about one disease here. Asbestosis, for example, a chronic lung disease, is directly linked to asbestos exposure.
The sources also mention another scary one, mesothelioma. Is that linked to asbestos as well?
Yes, mesothelioma is a really aggressive cancer that affects the lining of the lungs, heart, or abdomen. Now, here's the thing. It's almost exclusively caused by asbestos exposure. And sadly, it often doesn't show up until it's already advanced, making treatment much more difficult.
So we're talking about a hidden threat with potentially devastating consequences that might not reveal themselves for years, even decades.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the full picture of asbestos exposure is so crucial. And this brings us to some fascinating, albeit concerning, research being conducted in Denmark. Yeah, so researchers in Denmark, they're measuring asbestos levels in the air near buildings, particularly those with those Eternit roofs we were talking about.
Right, and those are everywhere over there.
Exactly. And remember, a lot of these roofs, they were made with materials that contain asbestos.
A million buildings, wasn't it? One of the sources mentioned a million buildings with these roofs.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It's a huge number. So they're trying to figure out, like, what's the real world risk here? How much asbestos are people being exposed to from these aging roofs?
Makes sense. So it's not just about knowing if a building has asbestos, it's about how much is actually getting out into the air, right?
Exactly. And is it enough to pose a health risk? And remember, as these buildings get older, those roofs are naturally going to weather and degrade.
Oh, so more fibers could be released as time goes on. That's unsettling.
Yeah, it's like a ticking time bomb in a way. And that's why this research is so important. It's not just about identifying individual buildings with asbestos. It's about understanding the bigger picture. Like how much of this stuff is actually ending up in the air we breathe.
And not just the air right around those buildings, I'm guessing. If those fibers are getting airborne, they could travel.
Precisely. That's the scary part. You could be exposed without even realizing it. You might not even live or work in a building with asbestos, but you could still be breathing in those fibers just walking down the street.
It really brings home that invisible threat aspect we were discussing earlier. And with that long latency period, it's like, how do you even know?
That's the thing about asbestos. It's not like an immediate injury where you can pinpoint the cause and effect. It's this slow burn, and that's what makes it so dangerous.
Okay, so we've got asbestos. It's potentially in a ton of older buildings, and its effects might not show up for years. That's a lot to process. What are we supposed to do with this information? Should we all be calling in the hazmat teams?
I think it's understandable to feel a little overwhelmed, but like we said at the beginning, knowledge is power, right?
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've uncovered some pretty unsettling stuff about asbestos. I'm guessing some of our listeners might be feeling a little on edge right now.
Totally understandable. It's a natural reaction.
Hmm.
But instead of letting the anxiety get the better of us, why don't we use this as fuel to empower ourselves, right? Knowledge is power after all.
Right, so what can we actually do about this? If you're listening to this right now, what steps can you take to address this whole asbestos thing?
Okay, well, the sources we've gone through, they actually offer some really practical advice on identifying asbestos, like little things you can do yourself.
Like what?
Well, one thing is checking for codes on building materials. For example, roof tiles, they often have codes stamped on them.
Okay.
And if you see NT, which means non-asbestos technology, that's a good sign. It means it was made without asbestos.
So it's like being a detective in your own home. You never know what you might find.
Exactly. But what if you're not sure or you really suspect there might be asbestos?
Yeah, what then? Call on the professionals.
Exactly. Especially if you're planning any renovations. Anything that involves messing with the structure of your house, definitely bring in the experts. Certified asbestos inspectors and abatement professionals, they're the ones to call.
They can tell you for sure what you're dealing with and take care of it safely, right?
Yep, they have the training and the equipment to handle it all. Identify it, remove it safely, or seal it up so those fibers can't get out.
Way better to be safe than sorry, right? Well, this deep dive has been, well, eye-opening is an understatement. We went from knowing vaguely about asbestos to understanding the history, the science behind the danger, and most importantly, what we can each do to protect ourselves.
And that's the thing about knowledge, right? It lets us move from a place of, oh no, I'm scared, to a place of, okay, I know what's up, and I'm taking action.
Exactly. So while the asbestos issue is a tricky one, we're not powerless. And hey, speaking of empowering ourselves, think about this. Our sources were mainly focused on Denmark, but asbestos, that was a global thing. What about where you live? Think about your own neighborhood, your city. Are there older buildings around? Maybe even historical landmarks?
That's a question worth asking.
It really is. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to continue your own deep dives. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll catch you on the next episode of The Deep Dive. So no, like grabbing a crowbar and tackling that old shed in the backyard.
Definitely not.